This is Jamey from Stillmeyer Games, and today I'm going to talk about my favorite mechanisms in the new Keyforge set, Dark Tidings. Here's some photos from when I played recently over the weekend. I have not played Keyforge really for a couple of years, ever since the original core set came out, in which I was enamored by the core playing system, which was you can play on your turn, you choose a faction, and you can play any number of cards from your hand and activate any number of cards on your table in that faction. Such a simple, beautiful, streamlined gameplay element there. Really, really like that about Keyforge. I've seen it more recently used in Royal Visit, a game that I recently talked about on this channel. But anyway, so I haven't played it in a couple years. A friend is really into Keyforge and invited me to play with him. He runs actually a podcast called Decision Space, if you want to check that out on YouTube. And so we played four people. We played three head-to-head matches. We played our random deck against each other. And I ended up playing two different decks. For the last game, we each opened a new deck. There are a few new mechanisms in this version of the game, in Dark Tidings, that I thought I would mention here today. And actually, let me start with the one that isn't entirely new, but it's new to me, and so I thought it was just really incredible. One of the unique things about Keyforge is that, I use the word unique, it is a unique game. Every deck in the game is uniquely printed, it's digitally printed. So the backs of the cards of your deck has a different piece of art on it, has a different name on it, and the configuration of cards in your deck is completely unique. There are always three different factions, but a completely different configuration of cards within those factions. However, they've taken the digital printing and the uniqueness to a whole new level in recent sets, and definitely in Dark Tidings, in which there are certain cards that change other cards in the deck. In that, for example, I don't know if I have one that I can actually show you here, but I had a card that influenced two other cards so that those cards had an icon printed on them that said, when you play these cards, you get to steal an amber from your opponent. So that one card had an icon printed on two other different cards. So it's actually a uniquely printed icon on two different other cards in my deck. And in one instance, I had two examples. I don't think I have them here. Here's an example where I have two of the same card in my deck. I had two of the same card in my deck, and one of them had that symbol on it, that unique symbol that made me able to steal an amber, and the other one didn't. So that was really neat to know that I had like basically a slightly better version of one of those cards, even though I had identical cards in my deck. Just incredible that they can actually change like the it's not the cost of the cards, but the benefits that you get when you play these cards. They can change that, and you don't have to remember it because it's actually printed on the cards themselves. Just absolutely amazing they can do that. The two mechanisms completely unique to this set that I thought were really cool. One is the high tide, low tide mechanism. I don't have a close-up photo of it, but you can kind of see it in the background here. In each duel, there is a single card that represents high tide, low tide, and it's always facing, except at the very beginning of the game, the high tide is always facing one player. It's high tide for them, and it's low tide for the other player, because I believe this expansion takes place on an ocean planet. There were a lot of aquatic creatures in it, and this status, this board status, had a pretty big impact on the game, because there are a number of cards that say, if it is high tide for you, do this thing. Usually it's a good thing if it's high tide for you. You get this bonus, or you get this extra thing. Some cards say, do this powerful thing and then raise the tide, or then lower the tide, or switch the tide, raise the tide, lower the tide. So you kind of have an advantage, but you lose the high tide status. So all these things that look at this very simple card, like it's just it's a single card that they add to the game that tells which player is high tide or low tide. And it impacts so many decisions that you make. And built into that card itself is a decision that you can make on your turn where you can raise the tide. So you can switch it so that you are high tide if you gain 3 chains, which basically means you draw, for 3 turns in a row, you'll draw 1 fewer card at the end of your turn. I just thought this was really clever. I thought it was very simple to implement. I liked the theme behind it, and I liked how much it's tied into the different cards. But at the same time, you could largely ignore it if you want to. There are cards that kind of force you to pay attention to it, but it isn't something that's constantly on your mind. You are not overwhelmed with new information based on this one mechanism. So I really like that. The other new mechanism, which I don't have a photo of here, is something called evil decks, evil twin decks. in the game. The basic idea, as I understand it, is that for many of the decks that are printed for this new set, there is an evil twin variant of that deck out there. So it's kind of like it's a very similar version to the original deck, but the art might be different. The cards might be slightly more devious, slightly more twisted. And the name it's like the evil twin deck of a specific name. And so foreseeably, I think they're kind of trying to build more community around these decks so that you can go online and say, hey, I have the evil twin deck for, let's see if I can see any of my deck names here. No, I can't see my deck names. You can ask anyone if they have the evil twin version of your deck, and then you can try to play against that version of your deck online. That's kind of the meta approach. But also when we were playing, we just had 2 evil decks in play. They didn't match up with any of our other decks, but it was neat to see kind of the slightly devious twists in those decks compared to our regular decks, even though they weren't actual twin decks of our versions. So I thought that was another cool thing that they're doing with the unique printing of Keyforge in the Dark Tidings set. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think this is a relatively new set, but if you've had the chance to play Dark Tidings, or if these give you any thoughts about any games with similar mechanisms, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.